The rain had barely begun when the single father pulled the door shut behind him, stepping into the cool marble corridor as though closing a chapter he never expected to have written. His footsteps carried the quiet weight of someone who had made a decision and made peace with it. In one hand he held his coat. In the other, the small canvas bag that belonged to his daughter. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the high-rise penthouse, the city below glittered beneath an angry sky. But inside, the silence outweighed the storm. Marcus Cole had finally chosen to walk away from the most extraordinary woman he had ever known. And just as his hand found the door handle, her voice reached him from across the room, soft, unhurried, and heavy with something he had never heard from her before. Before we go any further in this story, if you believe in second chances, quiet courage, and love that finds people in the most unexpected places, take a moment to support SIF Stories. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. His name was Marcus Cole. He was not the kind of man whose name appeared on anything except work orders and school permission slips. He drove a dented truck that complained every morning before warming up, and he spent his days repairing boilers and heating units in buildings whose owners he would never meet. He was also the most devoted father his daughter had ever known. 6-year-old Nora had lost her mother 3 years earlier to an illness that arrived without warning and left without giving anyone time to say goodbye properly. Since then, Marcus had quietly taught himself everything that had once been shared between two people. How to style a little girl's hair, how to pack a lunchbox with something that felt like love, how to hold a small body in the dark when nightmares came, and how to make the morning feel safe again before the day even started. His routine was not glamorous, but it was built with intention. Early mornings meant heart-shaped waffles because Nora had once declared that food shaped like hearts tasted better, and Marcus had never stopped believing her. Evenings meant homework, dinner, and whatever story she chose from the growing stack beside her bed. Life had narrowed into something smaller than he once imagined for himself, yet somehow more meaningful than anything he had known before. Sophia Reeves lived in a world that operated by entirely different rules. At 39, she had built a clean technology company from a bold idea and an unwillingness to be told what was impossible. Her name appeared regularly in financial publications and on the short lists of the most influential leaders in the country. Rivals respected her. Investors sought her. And almost no one truly knew her. The press had long settled on a particular image, a woman of immense capability who kept the world at a deliberate distance. What they rarely understood was why. Sophia had spent the better part of her career watching people approach her with agendas wearing the mask of friendship. She had learned, through disappointment repeated often enough to leave scars, that wealth and power had a way of distorting people's motives. So she built her walls methodically and maintained them without apology. She was not cold. She was simply careful in a way that the world often misread as detachment. Their lives crossed on a gray Tuesday afternoon in early November. Marcus had been called to service the climate control system in one of Sophia's office buildings. Routine work in an unfamiliar building, nothing more. But Nora's school had closed that day due to an unexpected maintenance issue, and with no one available to watch her, Marcus brought her along. She spent the afternoon tucked into a chair in the building's main lobby, coloring in a worn sketchbook she carried everywhere. Employees walked past without a second glance, accustomed to seeing only the kind of people the building was designed to impress. Sophia was passing through the lobby between meetings when she stopped. Something about the small figure hunched carefully over a drawing made her slow down in a way that almost nothing had in years. She leaned over and looked. Nora had drawn a house surrounded by a garden overflowing with sunflowers, 2 figures standing out front. She explained to the woman now crouching beside her that it was the house where she and her dad were going to live one day when everything was better. Sophia, who could hold the attention of a boardroom without effort, found herself staying far longer than her schedule allowed. Nora spoke with the kind of open honesty that adults spend years unlearning, and each answer she gave to Sophia's quiet questions carried something that felt unexpectedly precious. When Marcus reappeared and began apologizing for the intrusion, Sophia stopped him. She told him it had been the most genuine conversation she had experienced in longer than she cared to admit. That afternoon became the first thread of something neither of them named for a long time. It began in small gestures. Sophia mentioned to her assistant that the repairman's daughter might enjoy seeing the rooftop greenhouse on the building's upper floor, and an invitation followed. A few weeks later, learning through a passing remark that Nora needed new school supplies and Marcus was stretching to afford them, Sophia arranged to have them delivered without ceremony. Marcus pushed back, unwilling to accept charity. Sophia insisted it was simply a gift from one person to another, no balance sheet involved. Slowly, cautiously, the distance between their worlds began to shrink. Sophia started appearing in the neighborhood where Marcus and Nora lived, arriving sometimes with books, sometimes with craft materials, always without announcement. Marcus remained measured. He was aware that their lives were not comparable in almost any practical way, and he protected that awareness like a shield. But he could not pretend that what Sophia offered his daughter felt anything other than real. Nora had no such reservations. She accepted Sophia into her world with the wholehearted ease that belongs only to children, and within a few months, the woman who had built a company worth more than most people could conceptualize was sitting cross-legged on a living room floor helping a 6-year-old glue paper stars onto a science project. For Sophia, these evenings in Marcus's modest apartment revealed something she had not expected to confront. Watching him navigate dinner and homework and laughter and bedtime routines with such quiet purpose made her aware of a particular kind of emptiness she had never allowed herself to examine closely. She had constructed something vast and impressive, but she had never constructed anything that felt like home. Marcus saw the shift in her. He also saw, with the honest clarity that comes from having lost someone you love, that the closer their lives became, the greater the risk to everyone involved. His daughter was already changing. The drawings in her sketchbook had begun to include a third figure standing alongside her and her father. He noticed it weeks before he allowed himself to think about what it meant. He began preparing for the possibility that leaving would be the most responsible thing he could do. Not because the connection between them was not real, but because he understood, perhaps better than Sophia did, how fragile the life he had built for Nora truly was. Media attention, public judgment, and the chaos that accompanied someone of Sophia's profile were not obstacles he was willing to place in his daughter's path. The evening he chose to end it was not planned dramatically. He had come to the penthouse to return a few books Nora had borrowed. But the weather outside and the atmosphere inside seemed to have agreed on the same mood. Sophia appeared distracted, the way people look when they are carrying something they have not yet found words for. Marcus spoke first. He told her carefully and honestly that Nora was starting a new chapter at a different school and needed the kind of groundedness that their current situation was making harder to maintain. He told her that what had grown between them mattered to him deeply, but that he could not in good conscience allow it to continue developing without thinking through the consequences for his daughter. He did not blame her. He did not suggest that she had done anything wrong. He simply named the thing he had been quietly carrying for months, and then he picked up Nora's bag and his coat. He believed as he walked toward the door that the conversation had ended the way difficult conversations sometimes do, with mutual understanding, a kind of dignified sadness and the quiet closing of a door that had never been meant to open as wide as it had. He was almost out when Sophia spoke. She did not ask him to reconsider. She did not argue or appeal to him with reasons or promises. Her voice, when it came, carried something raw and unguarded that she almost never let surface. She simply asked him whether Nora would still draw their house with 3 people in it after tonight. Marcus stopped walking. The question moved through him in a way he had not prepared for. He stood there in the doorway with the small canvas bag in his hand, and his daughter's sketchbook inside it, and he thought about every drawing she had made over the past several months. He thought about the third figure she had quietly added without explanation. He thought about what it would mean for a child who had already lost one person to lose another, not to death this time, but to a decision made by the person who was supposed to protect her. After a long moment, Sophia spoke again. She said that for most of her life, she had treated relationships as temporary arrangements, things that would eventually reveal their cost. But Marcus and Nora had arrived in her life without wanting anything from it. Nora had never once looked at her with the calculating eyes Sophia had grown so accustomed to reading. Marcus had never treated her like someone to be impressed or leveraged. For the first time she could remember, she had felt like a person rather than a position. Outside, the rain pressed harder against the glass. Inside, Marcus turned around slowly. He was no longer standing at the threshold. He was somewhere between the life he had come to protect and the one he had not expected to want. What happened next was not a grand romantic declaration. It was quieter than that and more honest. It was an agreement, tentative and without guarantees to try. To let something real exist between two people who had arrived at each other's lives from opposite directions and somehow found a common language in a little girl's drawings and heart-shaped waffles and the particular silence that comes when trust is being built one small moment at a time. The world did eventually take notice. There were headlines that questioned Marcus's motivations and columns that doubted Sophia's sincerity. Neither of those things disappeared quickly. But they grew less significant on the afternoons when Nora tore across an open park with the kind of joy that makes adults forget every complicated thing. And the two people watching her from a bench nearby looked at each other and understood without words that they had made the right choice. The house from Nora's drawings did not materialize overnight, but its foundation was being laid in quieter ways, in shared routines and slow Sunday mornings, in the patient work of learning to belong to people you had not planned on needing. If this story has touched something in you, please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone in your life who believes that love can arrive in unexpected forms, and subscribe to SIF Stories so you never miss another story like this one. And I have one small request before we reach the end. In the comments, leave the word hope if you believe that a single moment of genuine kindness can quietly change the direction of a life. Years later, Marcus would sometimes think back to that doorway. It had felt, in that moment, like the most reasonable exit he had ever considered. And a single question asked softly by someone finally willing to be vulnerable had been enough to change everything. Sophia Reeves still led one of the most closely watched companies in the country. Her name still appeared in the kind of publications that tracked power and influence. But the title she held with the most care was one that Nora had given her on a sleepy evening during a bedtime story. A word so ordinary that most people would have overlooked it, and so significant that Sophia had never once taken it for granted. And Marcus Cole, the man who had once defined his life entirely by what he owed his daughter, discovered something he had long stopped expecting. That sometimes the truest form of courage is not walking away from what frightens you, but turning back toward the thing that asks you, quietly, to stay. If this story stayed with you, please like the video. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that genuine connection still exists in this world. And tell us in the comments which moment moved you the most. Your support is what keeps SIF Stories going.